One application of what we've been talking about is artificial gravity, in quotes. The lack of gravity is a considerable hazard in long-term missions in space. The human body depends on a gravitational gradient from head to toe, and without it, various degenerative effects set in. Although we don't know how to generate gravity, true gravity, one proposal to mimic its effects would be to spin spaceships. The normal force required to move the astronaut in a circle would create the appearance of gravity. So we have an astronaut standing in a space station that rotates at a fixed rate. At a particular moment, she lets go of the ball at chest height. So she's holding the ball here, and now she's going to let it go. And what happens, of course, is that, which isn't too surprising because first law says that once she lets go of the ball, there are no forces on it, so it continues at the velocity it had while going around the space station, which we can compute, remember, as v equals omega r. All right. But what's going on here looks very different to people who are inside the space station, like the astronaut, or people outside who are watching it. So if you sort of imagine that we have aliens out here observing her, then while she's her reference frame is non-inertial because it's rotating, it has an acceleration. Their reference frame is inertial. And so what they see is what we're seeing here, which is she lets go of the ball and it just goes on in a line at a constant rate. But it's very different from her viewpoint. Her brain doesn't really believe that she's accelerating. Our brains never do. And so she sees something different. In the inertial frame, the ball simply continues at the same velocity, traveling in a straight line at the same speed, and this lands here. But from her point of view, she's not accelerating, she's not rotating. Instead, she sees the ball fall at her feet. It starts here and ends here, and she says this must be the direction of the force on it. Of course, she doesn't see all these dots because remember, for each of these dots, she's right above it. Like her head is tracking out this circle as well. Well, it's a terrible circle, but something like that. And so she's always seeing the ball directly below her, like that. They have two different viewpoints. Which one's right? Well, that's not a thing physics can answer very well, but we do know that we can apply Newtonian physics correctly in inertial reference frames, and things will be weird in non-inertial reference frames. From the point of the astronaut, she suffers no acceleration. She feels a force against her feet. There must be some force pushing her down into the ground, right? And so the net force in the y direction is this normal force from the wall pushing on her minus the weight of the ball pulling down. From the second law, of course, the net force is ma, but she thinks that she's not accelerating, so it's 0. And therefore, she thinks that mg is Fn. I'm putting the g here in quotes because this is not g of 9.8 meters per second square on Earth, but rather the free fall acceleration she would measure, the weight that she would feel. This is what her scale would read. And she'd say, well, if I read my scale and I divided by my mass, I would get what g would have to be. But the aliens outside are in an inertial reference frame. So for them, there's an acceleration towards the center. She's going around in a circle, and we know that anything going in a circle has an acceleration towards the center, whose magnitude is v squared over r, or as we showed before, omega squared r. So we set up that the net force is now just the normal force against her feet, and the net force is m times the acceleration, which in this case is the centripetal acceleration, so m omega squared r, and therefore the normal force is m omega squared r. And then we fall on one of the sillier sounding rules, the reflexive property in algebra, which is that the normal force equals itself. That's the same physical force, same interaction between her feet and the plate of the deck. So we can say that Fn equals Fn, so mg equals m omega squared r. So this fake g has to be omega squared r. And then remember that omega squared r itself is 2 pi over t squared times r, or 4 pi squared over t squared times r. The key thing is that everything on the space station has the same omega, or has the same t, and therefore gravity depends only on your distance from the axis. And we could compute, if we know how long it takes to go around once, or equivalently we knew what its angular velocity was, we can figure out what force of gravity she would seem to feel. Some implications. The space station can have different gravity levels by having different actual levels, because this quasi-g is omega squared r, so that as we increase distance from the center, we also increase the effective gravity, the weight that you feel. Or, putting it the other way, as we head towards the center, gravity gets weaker. And that has some implications we'll see in it. All right, simple calculation. Let's say the space station has a radius of about 8 meters, that's 2.5 stories, and takes about 22 seconds to rotate once. I have a reason for picking those particular numbers, which we'll get to in a slide or two. What effective gravity would the astronaut feel? And we say, well, g effective is 4 pi squared over 22 quantity squared times 8 meters, which turns out to be 0.65 meters per second squared, or about 0.066 g. So this is definitely weak gravity. It's much weaker than even on the moon, which is 0.16. It's about a third of that. And it's about, what is that, a 16th of that on Earth, something like that. All right, the astronaut feels about only 7% as heavy on the Earth. By the way, that's pretty close to weightlessness, but not weightless. So things would settle to the floor, and most likely your biological systems would be fooled into operating correctly. There would still be a pressure gradient from your head to your feet, even though it's a relatively weak one. And I don't know the numbers. I'm not sure that NASA knows the numbers as to how strong that field has to be for it to be equivalent to Earth gravity. So this might be too little, but we could probably easily get to moon gravity, not too hard. If we wanted to get to Earth gravity, we would reverse this, of course, and we would say that we'd set g to be 9.8 and see what t has to be, and we'd find that the period is about 5.6 seconds, considerably faster. In fact, just about 4 times faster, which is not surprising because since this is kind of a 16th, but we have a t squared, we get the factor of about 4. One of the places you can see this in pop culture, for certain values of the word pop, was in the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a film by Stanley Kubrick based on a story by Arthur C. Clarke, because at one point Stanley Kubrick said to Arthur C. Clarke, I want to make a good science fiction movie that's interesting and yet scientifically valid. To the extent to which he succeeded is open to some debate, but it is pretty intense, and the science in it is pretty decent, at least up until the end. So here we have a spaceship that's going to be coming into docking at a space station that's been rotating. Also, Space Odyssey made it de rigueur for science fiction to use classical music. So here we have a space plane, and it's on approach to this space station, which is spinning so as to give gravity to the people on it. And we can see that what they end up doing is coming into dock on the axis, because on the axis the speeds are the least, so they can just spin around their own axis, match the rotation of the space station. Otherwise they'd fly on the edge, which is hard. So it's a little hard to see, but out here somewhere is the space plane. So now we're looking inside the dock. You might also recognize this as the landing dock on the Death Star, which is the way we chose to look like it. Here's our space plane coming in. And it's doing what look to be these odd maneuvers, but that's because the space station is rotating. On the Death Star, of course, this was just an empty pit, but here Kubrick has overlaid people to make it look more realistic. And you can see them upside down because gravity is 0 right at the center of this point. You can also see now the spaceplane has started undergoing its own rotation to match the rotation rate of the space station. As a different aside, these are not really computer displays because in 1968 they didn't have computer displays. So they mopped up graphics and put them on the computer. All right, and memory of Stanley Kubrick. A later scene is set on the spaceship Discovery on its way to Jupiter, which is an 18-month trip according to technologies that they're using here, which would have been too long for astronauts to just be in free fall. It would possibly lead to muscle degeneration. We've seen after a year of somebody in orbit that it can be pretty significant. And in 1968, they really thought that it might be fatal. So they assumed that there would be some sort of rotating section that would give you gravity on the space station and on the spaceship, and that's this. This section is the habitation section. This is the powerful nuclear reactor that's keeping everything running. This is mostly maintenance stuff, designed mostly to put the habitation thing far away from the hard-to-shield nuclear power plant. If you watch the movie, this is the antenna later on has tremendous plot impact, but we don't care about right now. In the habitation section, this is spinning in and out of the page, actually. This is the axis of rotation, so that the astronauts can seem to have gravity, and that's what we'll see next. So here we have David Bowman, and I think this is Bowman, and he's running around the habitation ring so as to stay in shape. He's just jogging a little bit. And the idea is that it's rotating about this axis, but from his viewpoint, it seems to not be rotating. Instead, he seems to see gravity. They'll cut to his viewpoint in just a second. All right, from his viewpoint, the thing rolls around, but he always feels an outward force, which he thinks is a downward force that the deck plate pushes against. You can also see the 3 astronauts in cryosleep and the 2 cryosleep things for the 2 astronauts who are awake. He's run around pretty fast. He's now running the other way, actually. This is the computer HAL's eye looking at the other astronaut who's awake coming through the hub. And in the hub, that astronaut is essentially weightless as he comes from the back of the ship. And then what he does is he comes out, there we go, and climbs down a ladder. So he has basically no weight here, and now he's climbing down a ladder, getting stronger and stronger weight. And then from his viewpoint, now he's on the floor. Kubrick was a good director and clever. You never see both Bowman and the other guy in frame at the same time, so you don't have to worry about, like, how come one of them doesn't fall? And then they stop it rotating, so people stop getting kind of thrown off, and they say, hey, now we just film. So one joy of the internet is that before you waste your time, somebody out there has probably wasted their time for you. Somebody out there, a film student, worked out what you had to do so as to get this to work, because of course what they had to really do was spin the set. And so this is going to be a match for match of this special effects shot where they reconstruct what it must have looked like for real in the inertial reference frame. So here they are clawing back through that low gravity section, and they have to swing into the non-rotating part of the ship, actually, which is where they're going, so that they can talk. And then Kubrick rotates the camera the other way, so it looks like they're now still. Even though they're in the rotating space frame, and we know that because they're climbing down where there will be gravity. You might notice there's not a lot of dialogue in 2001: A Space Odyssey, although there is some talking back and forth. you might wonder, how did he achieve this, especially in 1968, where there's no CGI, there's no advanced computer control of things, and it's kind of impressive. He basically built a giant Ferris wheel set, and they spun the set. They literally spun the set under the astronaut, who was always standing here, and had to run at the correct speed so as to end up, not falling off, end up not moving up. But they rotated the scene under him as stuff went on, and I think they did something similar for the hallway, which I think is back here. When they were doing the rotating shots, the astronauts were strapped in. When Frank Poole is just running around the set, the entire set is actually spun about him. This is part of Kubrick's obsessive dedication to perfectionism and realism, and it supposedly cost about $750,000, but that was in 1968. So today that would be about $5.5 million for what comes out to be maybe 30 seconds of footage. Kubrick was a little bit obsessive, but it's kind of nice because we can see how you can mock this thing up even on the Earth. You can make it look right. Today it'd probably be done mostly in the computer rather than the camera, but